Empathy is not putting yourself in the place of another person. That's emotional projection. I've talked about this before. Empathy is understanding how other people feel, understanding how they think, but really understanding how they feel. And so I think there's a big disconnect whenever people are thinking about how other people are going to feel. It's not bad to start with the theory of mind that's most obvious to us, which is ourselves, right? Our theory of mind begins with ourselves, that we understand that we have thoughts and feelings, and we see other people and we imagine that they have thoughts and feelings. So the model that we're going to use for modeling their thoughts and feelings is going to be our own thoughts and feelings. You know, getting hit with a hammer, we don't like that. It feels bad. So if, naturally, if we hit someone else with a hammer, they're not going to like it and they're going to feel bad. This is an interesting thing to think about with, like, for instance, sociopathy. As it's like, does the sociopath not understand that it causes pain? Yes, he does, but it doesn't matter to him. But like, it doesn't, there's no feeling of like that pain, that it's bad that other person feels pain. If that makes any sense. But we can get trapped into thinking that other people are like us, but, right? That this group of people over there is just like us, but they're in a different place. And that's not really how it works. So the reason I'm leading with empathy is that when you are thinking about how other cultures operate, the whole idea of another culture being different is that those people are acting differently from you and me. They are thinking differently and they are feeling differently. And the way that the culture operates and the way that people express themselves within their culture, the way that they operate within the cultural matrix is, by it being different, produces a different set of thought patterns. So Izzat, if you don't know what this is, this became kind of a meme on Twitter over the last, couple of days. I wrote an article on it that'll be published tomorrow, I think. So let me give you the Substack. Last Substack article was on the Chipson dilemma, which is really the problem of scam, of making a fake thing, the problem of fake things, whether it's a fake AI image or it's a fake guitar. Who's being victimized when you make a fake thing? So I go through the moral problem with that is that you're really depending on an asymmetry of knowledge in order to gain whatever, whatever financial gain you're trying to get out of selling a fake Gibson. Really depends on some kind of asymmetry of information. So anyway, when we talk about Izzat is the hard to define social status and credit system that works in the Indian subcontinent and within the culture and cultures of India. I don't want to portray India as completely a monoculture. It's like you think, well, there's all these Hindu, like they're Hindu, their religion is Hindu. Kind of. Right? Hinduism, you can read up on this, is a bit of a construct because there's many folk religions, kind of like with paganism. Like there's no one paganism. Like there's no such thing as paganism. There's the worship of gods and the piety towards those gods, and that varies by region and by cult and things like that. So that's also true in India, right? It's not just that there's Hindu and yoga and Islam or something. Islam is something very different from Hinduism, but like there's many different practices that make that up. But the idea of Izzat is very pervasive, and the feedback that I've gotten on it especially is like, this is a thing that's really common in northern India. It's present a little bit everywhere. If you think of how the caste system works, I read another article a while back. I'm trying to remember who wrote it. It was written by an Indian, and his whole point was like, as an outsider, you hear about this caste system and you're like, oh, this caste system's bad. He goes, but really, India is a land of 1 billion castes. Everybody is trying to have a different and superior social relationship to everybody else. And so everything that they do is designed to undermine another person's social standing and lower them, like give them negative Izzat, or it is attempting to improve their own social standing. And so you're going to gain social standing by gaining wealth or by taking wealth away from people. So somebody from Kiwi Farms wrote a really good write-up on that, and I'll go ahead and just link the X post. You guys can read it whenever you feel inclined to read it. It's pretty good. That's a pretty good read. And the reason I want to bring this up is that a lot of times when we're thinking of immigrants, we're thinking immigrants are like us. And they are like us in a lot of ways. And it's important when we're looking at another culture to kind of start at the places where we're the same, so that we can gain an understanding of the ways that a culture is different. Cultures aren't just arbitrary things that produce different food because of where they're located and things like that. If you follow the modern kind of multicultural mindset to its conclusions, it basically would mean that there is no such thing as culture, like culture is arbitrary, but I don't really think that. And I think being able to understand where other people are coming from is really important. So when you are talking about Indians, if you have one family of Indians immigrate to the United States, and I knew this because I grew up with Indians, right? I had Indian friends in high school. I had even a close friend who was Indian. And you wouldn't have any idea that they had this concept called Izzat, because when they're surrounded by normal white Americans, they don't do this stuff. They just act normally, right? Because they're second generation and they just get kind of sucked into the flow of American culture. And that's fine. And usually that's kind of what the American idea of immigration is. Somebody comes over here and they get kind of subsumed into the American culture and become American in their practices and then eventually in their thoughts. And there's a lot of thoughts that you don't realize create our wealth until you go to a place that doesn't have those thoughts. And India is one of those places, but Izzat is really the social system that India expresses that we might call low trust society that's present in many third world countries. Or you might call it a shame-based society versus a guilt-based society. Those are really good analogies for thinking of Izzat. And the reason it matters is that if you bring over lots of people, when they are in their own little group and enclave, they just reproduce the cultural practices and the cultural thoughts from their home country. And then they may reproduce those basically against the native population in a way that other people are not prepared for. If you're getting a phone call, I'll just give you an example. If you're getting a phone call, and you don't recognize the number, are you going to pick up the phone? If it was 1995, you would just pick up the phone if it rang. But now nobody picks up the phone. Why? Because it's a scammer. Where's the scammer from? What nationality is the scammer going to be? You guys already know this. They're going to be Indian. Why are Indians able to do phone scams? Well, because it doesn't really violate their cultural mores and practices to scam people out of money. For their home culture, scamming people out of money doesn't really matter. In fact, if you're able to scam someone out of money, it's because you're smarter than them and they're stupider than you. So this also exists in other third world countries. I remember Varg having a great anecdote where he was in Iraq and everybody is trying to scam you. So the default for any interaction between two people is they're both trying to scam each other. And only through haggling and arguing and ferreting things out do you arrive at a fair price and a fair exchange. And then if someone says, I'll do this for this amount of money, and you offer them half, they're like, oh, you're very clever to know that it's only worth half, right? So the price information that people give out is not information. Whereas here in the West, our default way of thinking about price systems, for example, is that they're honest. It's an honest bid. Like if you go to a store and something is $2, you just think it's $2. You don't think about going up to the store counter and being like, I'll give you $1 for this. You don't think about haggling. We assume that the price information is actual price information. But when you're in an economy where everybody's asking for something randomly, depending on the social standing of the two participants, they're going to change the price. They're going to change what they're trying to do to try to scam everybody out of something. Then price information doesn't have any information. It doesn't tell you anything. You don't really know how much the candy bar is worth because it could be worth anything. You don't really know how much services cost because they could be worth anything. Only if you're very clever, meaning you fight everybody on every single cent that they want to charge, can you start to slowly over time understand this price system which is not displayed anywhere. It's completely subtextual. This is the way things operate in a lot of third world countries. And if you've never experienced that, I mean, you maybe can experience that if you're in America. Like if you go to Mexico and you go to like a market in Mexico or something, you can kind of expect to haggle a little bit. But usually the price information is pretty close, even if you have to haggle in Mexico. It's not that way in like Iraq, where like nobody has a price displayed because you need to ask, and what the price that I'm going to give you is going to be dependent on how much money I think I can get out of you. Or maybe like if you go to Chinatown in New York, like you go to some of these markets that are full of maybe gray market goods, you may find that there's no price information. You have to discover the price information by arguing and haggling with people. But yeah, so if you have this continent of a billion different little castes and everybody's trying to get one on everybody else, you're like, why do Indians want to scam us? Well, they scam each other too, right? It's not a white man bad kind of thing. It's just applying their culture to a foreign culture where we have a high trust society where we trust each other in a whole bunch of different ways. Our economy runs on trust. We rarely think about the trust that's involved in our economy to allow us to work efficiently and smoothly. There's so much time wasted. There's so much effort wasted. There's money wasted, because time is money, by not having accurate price information or by having every single interaction be a scam. You lose a lot of stuff. We've lost our ability to just pick up the phone, to just call other people. We lost an entire mode of communication basically because of scams. So if you imagine that on a larger scale where it's like the shopkeeper, everybody's trying to scam you, chances are you would not like it. The reason it's relevant is I go back to, I grew up with Indians. They didn't do this. Why? Well, because they weren't in India. They were in America. So they adopted the social practices of America because those are the practices of 99% of the people around them. And then they start to think like Americans. Like, you need to be honest with your price system. You need to be honest when dealing with people. If you scam them out of money, you may never get a job. They'll spread around that you're a crook and you won't get a job again. This line of thinking may be absent in a lot of third world countries. And so if you're importing large groups of people from one area, you're going to have those cultural problems. It's one of these things that people have a lot of difficulty understanding the difference between individuals and groups. I encountered this a lot with the baby boomer video, is that they thought, I'm not like this, or it was always boomers, but I'm not like this. Yes, but the group, this is the way the group acts as a group. And so when you're thinking about Izzat, you're thinking about how the group acts as a group, not how individuals act. But I'll give you an anecdote with, some of the Indians I grew up with. I had a close friend, and he was basically Americanized. He was second generation. His parents were from India, but he was still in the Indian culture because obviously, all of his siblings were married to other Indians. They didn't marry white Americans or anything. So they married people in their religion. They married people, they did things in their culture kind of outside of like school and work and things like that. They were local business owners. They didn't run their businesses dishonestly, in my opinion, but they were businesses that they did run a little bit of gray market stuff, right? Like they would have Cuban cigars under the counter and things like that at their local liquor store. But I started to realize that they had different cultural practices as I got to better know my friends, like that they would have to stop and explain, like, okay, this is a thing with my culture that maybe needs some explanation. So if they got a new car, they wouldn't drive that car around very much. They wouldn't show off the car. Whereas an American would get a new car and they'd be excited about it. They'd like drive it to church and be like, I got this new car. And the reason is because other Americans think it's cool to look at a nice car, and they will congratulate you for being able to buy a car, and they think it's cool that you have a car. And the other social stuff of like jealousy and stuff is not as much on the radar. Well, for Indians, it's like, if they see us with a new car, they'll know we're doing really well. And all of a sudden, people will call in their debts even if those debts are imaginary, they'll think that you owe them something. It's like, oh, so-and-so's doing well. How can I get money out of them? You owe us for this. Can you get us a job doing this? Can you get us money doing this? You should do business with us. You should choose our company because, I chose your company in the past. You owe us, right? And you're doing great. So of course you can afford to pay us what we want, right? Or people start to ask for favors. Can you hire us? Can you do this? So the display of wealth all of a sudden becomes a social issue because it shows that you've moved up too much. And if you move up too quickly, then everybody's going to start having a claim, I guess, a claim on what you're doing. It's weird. It's weird because Americans don't really think that way. But when it comes to these Indian families, everything was a negotiation and everything was interconnected and everything was a bid for different status with each other. So I got to learn a little bit about these, while they function normally at school, they don't do any of this stuff at school. Why would, think of a 16-year-old. Why would a 16-year-old hide the fact that he bought a new cool car, like a sports car? He wouldn't. He'd show off to his friends. Why didn't he show off? Because his Indian friends would all of a sudden, it would create that issue, right? You can't show it off too soon. That's kind of what it is. So anyway, you start encountering some interesting different cultural practices. So when I talk about empathy, it's to understand how these people actually think means to understand the ways that they think that maybe you don't approve of and maybe you don't like and maybe you would prefer if they thought differently. One of the big mistakes, both sides make this. It's not like a liberal Republican thing. It's just the way that we're built here in a high trust society in the West is we operate on good faith, and our starting point is to assume other people are operating on good faith. When in India and in a lot of other third world countries, it's the opposite. You need to start with an assumption of bad faith, and only as you argue and haggle and ferret out information can you gain enough to where you think the person you're going to be able to actually get something valuable out of the person. This is why there's so much corruption in India. This is why there's so much corruption in the third world as well. This is why there's styrofoam bridges in China. It's a low trust versus high trust society. In a high trust society, we start with assuming people are operating on good faith, and they generally are. And the fact is, if you put one immigrant into a white American schoolroom, they will operate, they'll get into the cultural flow. They won't become the scammer in the room because they'll start to understand how other people think by interacting with them. They quickly update their mental software to one that operates in that environment. But if you have a whole classroom of them, then it's just an Indian classroom in America. It's no longer that melting pot that people want to talk about. It just becomes a little piece of a foreign culture, and a foreign culture that it's okay to say, we don't want that. We don't want that bit of that foreign culture in America. We actually don't want that. And you need to not be that way. You need to not care about Izzat. You need to not think of status in this way. But are you going to deprogram those people? Probably not. Is the dirt going to magically transform the way that they think so that they all just magically abandon Izzat, the Izzat thought process? No, that's not going to happen. That's really naive to think that that's the way that things are going to work, because have they ever worked that way before? Not that I'm aware of, right? So yeah, I gave you some good anecdotes. Think of high trust versus low trust society. The other one that I've heard is a shame versus a guilt society. In India, it's a shame society. So, and this works this way in because we're focusing on Izzat and we're thinking about India and the fact that all of these accounts recently on X were revealed to be Indian. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because they don't really have any care about being honest or dishonest. It's mostly about, well, I could gain some money by doing this. And somebody even in the video that I made on that, pointed out hey, for an Indian, making Elon bucks is like a living. So you can't be mad at them. It's I could be mad at them for being dishonest. Being dishonest, yes, that's a judgment that we have independent of culture. That's the difference. One of the differences between our cultures. Yeah, I understand that you're scamming people and that you don't have to get a lot of money scamming them to build a living, but you're scamming people, and we don't like that, right? We don't go, oh yeah, of course, it's understandable. It's yes, I understand that, and I don't like it. I understand why you're doing it. And I think it's bad. So a shame society, shame is external to the self, right? Shame exists between you and other people, whereas guilt is internal. When you do something bad in Christian society and you're operating with a Christian mindset and Christian morals, the weight of that sin is on you as an individual, on yourself. You need to go to confession. You need to figure out how to make amends. It's like you find out about, I think the person who shot Charlie Kirk, got guilty enough to turn himself in, right? People are afflicted by guilt and confess their sins to people because they have to alleviate this guilt, even if it causes punishment on them. It's a guilt-based society. We internalize sin versus a shame-based society. The problem is that other people know that you did wrong. So the action doesn't become really a problem for the person until they lose social status because they got found out, right? They got revealed to be a dishonest scammer that everyone laughs at. They lose Izzat. Minus 100 Izzat. Minus 8 million Izzat, whatever it is. They lose status. And this little thing that I think is a pretty good explanation of it. I mean, I've heard people talk about Izzat before. Like I said, I think it's India's way of expressing this is a person can spiral enough to end up committing suicide because they lose all of their face, right? Kind of like in Japan that could happen, or China. It's if you lose everything, eventually you end up going no, you can't get anything done without Izzat. That's the way it is in India. So if you get shamed enough, you actually won't, the police won't help you because you're too low status to be helped. Your neighbors will just steal from you because there's no consequence to stealing from somebody who's an untouchable. Things like that. Life becomes unbearably bad if you have zero Izzat. So you just, you view suicide as better. But the shame is not that you lied or that you stole from people or that you scammed people. The shame is that you got found out as a low status person that has to do that. Does that make sense? Whereas if you're able to, somebody comes to stay at a hotel and they show up, they've booked it, they've paid ahead of time. You're well, the room is actually not 800 rupees. It's, or what do they use it? Rupees? I'm going to say rupees. I know that's the Zelda. My mind is blinking. Is it rupees? Or am I thinking of Russia? Anyway, it's not 800 rupees. It's 1,600 rupees. And we can't give you the room unless you give us another 800. It's but you said it was 800, right? In America, we'd be no, you have a contract with me and I'll sue you. I'll just take you to the court system if you don't give me the room that you. But in India, it's go to the court system. The court's I'm not gonna rule you in your favor because your Izzat is too low, right? So if you feel you can get an extra 800 out of someone, you will. And if they push back enough, or they make enough threats, or they come get the police and the police are going to side with them, which they almost never do, right? It's okay, well, I'll give it to you for 800. You're very clever. You're very, very clever. Do you want that in America? I guess is my question there. So that's the shame. That's shame, right? The shame only happens when you get caught, whereas guilt is inside. It's inside the self, and that makes a big difference there. So, yeah, somebody, I'll take a look at the chat in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about that. That's Izzat, and I think it's pretty relevant for where we're going here in America, not just for Indian culture, but any other culture where we're importing large numbers of people. We could talk about Mexican culture as well. Mexican culture doesn't have Izzat, but it has its own issues that people talk about, like machismo and the vendetta culture and things like that. These were problems with Italian immigrants and Irish immigrants, is that they brought over their cultural practices, and you had to actively discourage people from engaging in those cultural practices so that you could have the cultural practices you want. And the fact is, a huge part of our wealth is derived from our cultural practices. It's not just our IQ, right? Italy has, if I remember correctly, Italy has the highest IQ in the world, but what's their GDP per capita? Well, that's the difference between cultures, right? It's not just IQ makes wealth. IQ plus a good high trust culture where there's consequences to bad actions. There's neutral parties like courts that can help enforce contracts. And there are, basically all the interpersonal standards that we use to do business. That's what creates the wealth of the United States to a great extent, and indeed the entire West, much more so than just IQ by itself, if that makes any sense. So